Well, let's get started. My name is Stephen Swanson. I am a professor here at the University of California in San Diego. I'm also the person that organized these information sessions, and I'm the one that's been sending you all of the email. So thank you all for coming. I'm going to talk a little bit about how this is going to work and what you can expect from today. So what is this all about? So our goal here today is to answer questions that you have about getting a PhD in computer science. And the kind of underlying motivation is to help you make an informed decision about whether you want to get a PhD. Everyone on the panel happens to be at UC San Diego, but this isn't a sales pitch for UC San Diego, although we are a great school and you should all apply here if you decide to go after a PhD. But the goal here is really just to provide you some good information about what a PhD is like and what's involved and so forth. The reason that we did this is I went looking around and it turns out that it's actually hard to find reliable information about this online. And there is a lot of information about getting PhDs, and some of it has various problems with it. Some of it's not kind of specific enough. PhDs in different fields work in different ways. So what you might hear about getting a PhD in economics probably doesn't apply directly to getting a PhD in computer science, or at least some of it does and some of it won't. And also just talking about graduate school in general, which includes a master's degrees and PhDs, also isn't quite right because getting a PhD is very different from getting a master's degree. Some of it is also too specific, so it's about a particular program. That information is all super valuable kind of later on in the process where you're trying to decide where to apply and eventually, if you're admitted, where to go. But when you're sort of making a decision, there's sort of some basic information that's kind of hard to sort through. And then some of the other information is just kind of out of date or wrong. There's also some research that shows that the best kind of information, the most useful kind of information to folks when they're deciding to get a PhD is information that comes from professors and graduate students. And so that's what we have on the panel today, are professors that advise graduate students that are getting PhDs and PhD students. Also, I should say this is a big experiment. This is the very first time that we have ever done this. So we're going to see how it goes. So thank you for showing up and also thank you for your patience. The way that this is going to work, so when you guys registered, you submitted over 600 questions about all different aspects of getting a PhD. I took the time, I sort of sorted through those, which was very interesting. Thank you for typing all that stuff in, and sort of consolidated them into kind of a top 20 questions or so. Those were up on Slido as of a couple days ago, and then people have added some more. So if you'd like to ask a question, the thing to do is to go to Slido. You can use this URL and enter that event code, and then you can go and enter a question. Or you should actually, first I would suggest searching for the question that you're interested in and voting it up if you find it. And then if you don't find it, then you should ask it, and hopefully other people vote it up as well, and then we'll be able to answer it. We're going to go through the questions more or less in the order of their votes on Slido, but we'll also do some kind of balancing across topics to make sure that we cover a bunch of different areas. So we're going to do some introductions so you can kind of know who is on the panel. So we have, I think it's, what is this, 4 professors and 3 graduate students. All of them are PhD students at UCSD. And 2 other graduate students that are helping moderate the questions. So what we're going to do is go through this list in order, and I'd like the panelists to share, if they're willing, where they're from originally, where they did their undergraduate, where they went to graduate school, and then one piece of information that they think is most important for undergrads to know about getting a PhD. So I will start. My name is Stephen Swanson. I am originally from Idaho. I went to undergrad at a school called the University of Puget Sound, which is a small liberal arts college in Washington. Then I went to the University of Washington in Seattle to get my PhD, and then I came to UCSD in 2006. And the most important thing that I think people should know about getting a PhD is that the admission process definitely has a little bit of an element of randomness to it. So if you get rejected from somewhere, you should not take it personally. But if you get admitted to somewhere, I encourage you to take that personally. And you should also, because it's a little bit random, it means that you should apply very widely, because there's no guarantee that you'll get in anywhere. But you almost certainly get in somewhere. So next, I will hand it off to Leo Porter.
Hi, I'm Leo Porter. I'm an associate teaching professor at UCSD. I'm originally from Missoula, Montana, and then my family moved to Pullman, Washington, which is where I spent most of my time when I grew up. My undergrad was at University of San Diego, which is also a small liberal arts college, just like Steve went to. And then I did my PhD at UC San Diego. Actually, I was at UC San Diego from 2004 to 2011 before I graduated and then became a professor at Skidmore College before I came back to UCSD as a professor. The one thing that I wish I'd known kind of as an undergrad going into grad school is that technical skills really matter, but having this broad base when you finish your undergrad will actually serve you really well. So I'll admit it, at times during grad school, it's going to feel like it's all about technical depth, especially this first year where you're taking a whole bunch of courses. But by the time you're kind of up and running in research, you'll find that there's real advantages to knowing how to write well and how to speak well. And you'll also, as you start to assess the impact of your research, you'll find that your knowledge of, say, liberal arts subjects, including philosophy or sociology or history, those become really helpful as well. So for those of you who are just finishing up undergrad, if you still have that chance to take maybe an advanced ethics class or an advanced writing class before you graduate, I'd actually recommend it.
Thanks, Leo. Kristen?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Kristen Vaccaro. I'm a new faculty member in the CSE department here. I actually grew up outside of Boston, Massachusetts, and then moved for my undergraduate all the way to the other coast to a small liberal arts college, Reed College in Portland, Oregon. And I guess one thing that I can mention is that I actually did my undergraduate degree in physics and switched to computer science when I started graduate school. So if anyone wants to talk about that, that's something that's very possible and is definitely something that I'm happy to talk about.
Nadia.
I'm Nadia Henninger. I'm an associate professor at UC San Diego. I grew up in the Bay Area in California, and I did my undergrad at UC Berkeley. So not a small liberal arts college, a very large public research university in which students disappeared into the void and professors don't learn your name. And I went to grad school at Princeton, which is a very different experience from a large public university. And then I actually just joined UCSD last year again. So I think the thing that I didn't quite understand about grad school when I started was that you can think of a PhD as joining one of the last remaining medieval guilds. So what you're doing is not going to school and taking classes anymore. You're doing an apprenticeship to join a guild of academia that involves wearing weird robes. It involves a lot of weird cultural things that you learn only from interacting in person. And if you think about it as an apprenticeship, the most important choice that you make is who you are apprenticed to, so who your advisors are. And I will leave it at that.
Thanks. Akshat.
Hi everyone, I'm Akshat. I'm a second year computer science PhD student at UCSD. For my undergrad, I'm from India and I did my undergrad from India in computer science. Then I worked for 4 years in software industry, came here to do my master's in computer science from Stony Brook University, New York, then joined UCSD as a computer science PhD student. Right now I'm working in bioinformatics, and something that I definitely thought I should have, it would have been better for me before applying to know was that even in computer science, That's something not very popular, but even in computer science, there are rotations that you can do before choosing a lab. And you can also do coursework in order to help you better select your field of research slash lab. So it's not, it is critical to know what you're planning to do, but you can always select what field you want to go in or what lab you want to join in after you get into a PhD program as well. And that's, I think, unique to United States PhD programs, but it's definitely an added advantage if you're coming directly from your undergrad. Thanks.
All right, Sachiko.
Hi everyone, I'm Sachi. I grew up in San Diego and then went up to UC Berkeley for my undergrad, where I doubled in physics and computer science. And now I'm back in San Diego. I'm a third-year PhD student with a focus on human-robot interaction. One thing that I think I didn't fully realize when I started my PhD was that clear technical writing is actually really important. And it's something that, it's a skill that you develop throughout your PhD, but it is very useful, I think.
And Mark.
Hi, I'm Mark. I'm a third-year PhD student. I focus
Can't quite hear you, Mark.
Is this better?
Yes, much.
Oh. Okay, cool. Hi, I'm a third-year PhD student. My focus is in cryptography. I also actually did my undergrad at Reed College. I didn't know that before I was joining this panel. There was someone else from Reed here. Which is, you heard, it's a small liberal arts college in Portland, Oregon. I grew up outside of Portland. And I mostly focused in pure math at Reed. So I had to switch over to computer science to come here. And I had a misconception when I was coming into my PhD about how much work is the right amount of work to do. So my first year, I was trying to do all this work. I was like, oh, you know, if you do 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day, you'll get a ton of progress out of it. And I realized eventually that it's important to do high quality work, which for me actually meant imposing limits on how much work that I did. So essentially, by maintaining my mental health, I was able to do better work, and because of that, the work-life balance, finding a good work-life balance has actually been very important to actually doing good work for me. Yeah.
All right, thank you everyone for that. We're going to move on to some questions now, but I'm going to first of all answer two very common questions that have very simple, pretty concrete answers. And this came up a lot in the questions that you answered on when you were registering. The first one is, do you need to get a master's degree first before you get a PhD? And the answer to that is absolutely not. If you don't have a master's degree, if you're an undergrad right now or you've graduated and you're thinking about getting a PhD, you can go directly to a PhD program and you will generally get a master's degree kind of along the way. About 2 years in, you will have satisfied all the requirements for a master's degree at the institution you're at, and you can fill out a piece of paper and you'll get a master's degree. If you do have a master's degree, that is also totally fine. You will finish with your classwork a little bit sooner and get on to doing research a little bit faster. But there is nothing, you won't be disadvantaged at all by not having a master's degree in the admissions process. And the really most important thing to know is that if you want a PhD, if that's your goal, then you should absolutely apply to PhD programs instead of master's programs. And that is because of the second point on this slide, which was the other big question, which is how do you pay for a PhD and how much does it cost? And the answer to that is that in the vast, vast majority of cases, you don't pay for your PhD. You will have a teaching assistantship. You'll usually almost always get a financial aid package from the institution, and you'll either have a teaching assistantship or a research assistantship, and that will cover your tuition. It will also provide a stipend so you can pay rent and buy food and so forth. And so you should not need to, in most cases, need to incur any debt to get a PhD. So myself, I went on a big road trip and spent all my money, literally all my money before I went to graduate school, and I had to borrow $1,000 from my dad. And then by the end of my PhD, I had saved a reasonable amount of money from my stipend and doing internships and so forth. You can also usually defer a lot of your student debt during the PhD process. So those are all really good things to know. It doesn't, there's obviously financial decisions, but it doesn't take a lot of like capital up front or debt to get a PhD. So with those two questions out of the way, we will answer some of your questions. So this is the list that we're gonna be going off of. And the way this is gonna work is I'll kind of read one of the questions off the top of this list, and then I'll open it up, and the panelists, if you could just kind of jump in and answer, and we'll take answers from a couple of folks, and then maybe we'll move on to the next question, depending on how things are going. So the first question is, what are some of the qualities of an ideal candidate for a PhD? And conversely, what might raise a red flag in a candidate's application? So who on the panel would like to take a crack at that? Or I can.
I guess I can start.
Go ahead.
So I think the easiest applications to admit are students who have they show in their statement of purpose that they know what they're getting into in research, and that they actually feel driven to do research for a particular reason, and hopefully they have worked in the area that they want to work in. So they've done some kind of research project or worked in industry in the area that they want to get a PhD in. And they understand what they're getting into in doing the PhD, that there's going to be a lot of research, that there's unsolved problems, that they want to have a job that involves research in the future. It's also important to demonstrate having technical ability through classwork, through research, through other experiences. Red flags are students who don't seem to know what they want to do in life. This can mean, this is not, I will say that I had this, that was me when I applied to grad school. I was rejected from almost all the schools that I applied to because I didn't actually know what I was doing. And now I understand from the other perspective why I was rejected. Obviously things worked out, but students who just seem to want to go to school because they don't know what else to do, because they've just been in school for their entire lives, and continuing with more school because they really like classes, since that's not really what a PhD is about. That is kind of something that brings some hesitation. So those are the things that I look at.
Does anyone else want to jump in?
I guess I could add just a bit. I mean, I completely agree with Nadia on what she said, but what I would add is I'm also looking for kind of unique qualities to that individual. And so, for example, someone may have gone to industry before they came back for their PhD, and they say, listen, I've spent 5 years in industry. This is what's broken with the process and how we educate software engineers. I want to come and I want to fix this. This is my goal. And so they have this unique background of their software engineering experience, and they're going to leverage that background to be successful. And so each of you have your own unique qualities. And so I would say talk up your unique contribution you can bring to the program by coming.
Great. So the next question is another one about admissions. So what matters most in the application? Grades, undergraduate grades, graduate grades, test scores, or recommendations and research experience? So I can answer this one a little bit. I served on the graduate admissions committee for quite a few years when I got here. I think all of these are important to some extent. One thing to know about graduate and particularly PhD admissions that's different than undergraduate admissions or even MS admissions is that it's a pretty small committee that does it, and a lot of the decision is based on the kind of preferences of individual professors. And so different professors will weight different things differently. I will say that, most of the applicants at, highly ranked PhD programs will have pretty strong test scores. They'll have pretty good grades. The things that can really sort of make an application, I guess, a slam dunk or very easy to admit are, clear experience with research or really strong letters of recommendation, even in the absence of research, or places where, maybe you're at a slightly smaller school, but you've done really well. And so it's clear that, you're pretty ambitious and are kind of standing out among your peer group, whoever that happens to be.
I'll chime in and talk about something that I didn't understand when I was applying as an undergrad. I didn't realize that at most schools, the way that admissions work, I guess I've been a professor at 2 schools and this is how it works. You were admitted by individual advisors, perhaps in a group, but there has to be an actual faculty member who says, yes, I want to admit this student, and in many cases is willing to pay for your first year. So it's not sort of an anonymous committee that goes through all of the applications and ranks them according to some scores of, oh, this person had a great GRE score, and oh, this person has a 3.8 GPA, and therefore they are here, and we're just going to take like the top, end students. The way it works is very idiosyncratic, that like, a particular faculty member says, oh, I have funding for this many students, so I'm going to try to admit some number of students this year. I'm going to look through the applications of the students who specifically put down my name on the application and try to find people who want to be in my group doing research with me, or like in my area. And so there are thousands upon thousands of applications. And so it's hard you can't go through all of them. So if somebody doesn't put your name down, or they don't say they want to work in your area, you may not ever see that application. So in order to be seen by you want to make sure that your application is seen by the faculty members that you want to work with. You want to know which faculty members you think you want to work with and make it clear why you want to work with them in your application. I will say not all schools do this. Some schools have sort of more general admission pools, and students may be admitted without having to be bound to a particular faculty member. But a lot of schools, it's if the faculty member has funding and they want to admit students, they will look through your application. If they don't, then it doesn't mean anything that you didn't get admitted there, because they didn't see it or they weren't looking for students.
Definitely. All right. Next question is, how do you find a topic and an advisor? And it'd be great to hear from some of the graduate students about how they found their topics and their advisors.
Yeah, I would like to answer this question. As I briefly mentioned earlier as well, like you can do rotations, and also coursework helps in deciding you to do like choose a topic or an advisor. Personally, I did my master's, and that helped me a lot in choosing my final research topic. I wanted to do a PhD, but I was not very sure that what my research interest would be. I joined a master's program, took courses, and found computational biology to be really interesting. Then did a summer internship in a lab in some other university, and that's how I got sure that this is what I wanted to do. Then after before joining my program, or before joining the PhD program, I did not know who my advisor would be. And then I got a call, and I talked to an advisor who basically sort of hired me to UCSD. But again, at UCSD, and this is something that may not be applicable to all institutions, but it was applicable here. I was able to do rotations, and I did a rotation in some other lab, which I ended up joining. Basically, I did not join the advisor who hired me. And that was because I was able to do a rotation. And I think that's something that's like very flexible and very helpful for students to do. Yeah. But in general, if there is no option of doing um, a rotation, you should definitely talk to the advisor before joining a program. Like there are always interview sessions or like greet and meet sessions before you choose to decide, before you decide to like join a program. And you should talk to the PhD advisor and their current grad students in detail about the lab before you decide to choose the lab.
I can chime in a little here. So I was sort of lucky in that I actually had done a summer of research at the lab that I joined before I ended up applying. There are a lot of opportunities for undergrads to do research over summer and get paid for it. I think it's like there's summer undergraduate research something through like the NSF. I forget exactly what it's called, but like look into opportunities like that, because those can be really useful in terms of figuring out like, is this actually an area that I enjoy doing work in? And, you know, whether or not you want to do stuff like that for the next like 5 or 6 years, right? Like Ascot was saying, I would also like try to email like grad students in the lab and maybe the professor if you can get them to reply. Just to figure out like if they like the lab, if they like the stuff they're doing, if they like the advisor, because that can be, they can give you a lot of insight into that. And so yeah, talking to those people can be really useful.
One other really quick point on this that is worth mentioning. I completely agree with the things that have been said before, but when you apply to different programs, you'll be admitted under different advisors and they'll have different topics, right? So to a certain extent, how you find your topic and advisor depends on where you apply to and also where you get admitted. So like when I got admitted to places, there were just a number of different options and they did very different things. So I chose the topic that seemed the most interesting to me after talking through them with all the advisors. So you can choose by choosing different institutions as well. Yeah.
Great, and the program that Sachi mentioned is called Research Experience for Undergraduates. You can search for REU through the National Science Foundation. They're fantastic. I did one when I was an undergrad. It was lots of fun. It's basically like being in mini graduate school for a summer, and you get paid and hang out in the dorms and party, and it's a good time. Next question. How does work experience as a software engineer factor in, or does it only count if you're part of a published research project? So this sort of comes back to, do you want to speak?
I mean, I can talk about it a little bit. I did work as a software engineer between undergraduate and graduate, my undergrad and graduate program. But if you want to start.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, I think this will probably depend on kind of what area you want to go into and what your history looks like. But I would say in my experience, it is definitely helpful. And it doesn't necessarily have to be part of a published research project. So, you know, I was coming out of a physics program. So I, you know, had a physics degree, but then got a job as a software engineer, worked for a number of years. And when I was applying to go back to graduate school, I had some recommendations from faculty that I had worked with, but then I also had a recommendation from one of my coworkers, essentially from that experience. And they were able to talk about sort of my work, talk about my work there. And, you know, I don't think it was a bad thing at all. And in fact, like this is a little bit answering the question from before, but I think if you're an applicant who is coming from, having prior industry or work experience, not only do you bring some sort of like prior experience of that actual workplace, but it also is an indication about how seriously you take the idea of research. So you already have a job, like you're going to be walking away from a job. And so people, at least I look at that and think that indicates something about your seriousness.
And I also say we're very much in the admissions process, we'll take experience from anywhere, right? It's like, as Nadia said, it's very personal and we're all looking at individual files. And if you've been building software that's right in our research area for 5 years in industry, like that's great. It doesn't at all need to be involved with the publication. All right, what kind of job can I get with a PhD and what is the job market like? Do any of the graduate students have a perspective on this from talking to their friends or what they're aspiring to do?
So I have not thought too much about this yet because I still have a few years before I graduate. But some of my lab mates who are graduating soon and some of the ones who have already graduated, some of them went into like assistant professorships or postdocs, and others, so that's like the more academic route. And then other people went directly into industry. So I think one of them ended up working for like Sony. One person is thinking of doing something that's pretty different from his PhD and going more into like, I think animatronics design or something. And then one of my lab mates who's graduating now is looking into, I think, a mix of postdocs and industry positions, depending on what she can get. So it sort of depends on what you want to do, I think. But there are a lot of different paths you can take.
I would say broadly, the job market for PhDs in computer science is very, very good. There's just a lot of demand. And more broadly, you can look at unemployment numbers and people with PhDs have the lowest unemployment rate across any kind of any levels of education. And you can get it, once you have a PhD, you know a lot about computer science. You also know a lot about how to tackle open-ended problems and work independently and do all this other stuff that's super valuable in lots of different areas. I don't know of any case where a PhD graduate, at least from our program, has had trouble finding a job that they were really excited about. Next question. This is a very good question. How can I have work-life balance as a PhD student? What do the PhD students think?
Yeah, I think that this is a super important thing to keep in mind. So you can look at all these statistics about mental health for PhD students, and there's some very depressing numbers out there. So like what I found is important is to have like a schedule, which both means like a schedule where I work and then also a schedule where I do things that aren't work explicitly. So like I bike every day, right? So it's both exercise and I like biking, and I always make time for biking every day. Normally that's because I commute into work. So it's like, you have to. But even during coronavirus, I've been biking every day, and I found that to be really important for my mental health. In general, people there are going to be times that you're going to have to work a lot, but it's usually right before paper deadlines. So times outside of paper deadlines, if you just work consistently, you can fit in other stuff as well.
Yeah, I agree that paper deadlines are definitely high workload, and I tend to, work quite a bit extra during those, or maybe not sleep quite as much. But in general, it's pretty, I have a pretty good work-life balance on that front. One of the things, because in undergrad, I definitely didn't, and I spent almost all my time just doing school stuff. And so one of the things that I knew coming into a PhD was that I needed to make sure that I had more other stuff that I was doing that wasn't just work. And like Mark said, I think that exercise is probably a pretty important part of that.
I'll jump in there. I think it's also a good thing to talk to your PI about. If like when you get into programs, it's a good thing to ask a PI, like how do they feel about work-life balance? How do they kind of continue to perpetuate a culture that allows students to like take a break from work and stuff like that? So it's definitely a good question to ask.
It's also good to ask, if you're considering joining a particular group, see if you can talk to other PhD students in that group, because they will know. And you know, often they will be forthright with their opinions about how that works in a particular group. And it varies widely by professor. Just like admissions varies a lot by professor, you know, what your experience of graduate student life is like also depends a lot on who your advisor is. And you know, there are some advisors that have group meetings on Saturday, and I personally would not choose such an advisor. And you're totally within your you know, rights and maintaining your mental health to do that.
I'll just quickly add, you should, along those lines, talk to the students of your advisor, prospective advisor, before accepting. So chat with the students, find out what their lives are like before you accept an offer from that school to work with that advisor.
And you'll usually have a chance to do that during, like, they have visit days. After you're admitted, you can go and visit the university and hang out with the graduate students, at least when there's not a pandemic.
And I think like one other aspect of that to think about in terms of work-life balance is thinking about what your goals are for your family life. So I just graduated, you know, I recently graduated and left a group where 3 of the most recent 6 students all had children during their PhDs. So working in a group, if that's something that's important to you, where that's, you know, supported, can be, you know, can be part of your decision as well.
And I'll also share an observation I had when I was a graduate student. And I wasn't married, I didn't have any kids when I was a graduate student. But there were people who did have kids and were married. And their experience in graduate school was a little bit different. Like they came in and they worked roughly from like 9 to 5, but they actually worked the whole time. And I worked from like 8 to 11:30, but I would go and play in foosball and, you know, go to lunch for an hour and a half. And that was all very fun. But, you know, those folks were just as successful, in some cases more successful than the folks that, you know, just spent their time looking for free food in the hallways. So you can totally do it and have a good work-life balance. It just, you know, as in a PhD and everything else, that takes some effort and some kind of intentionality to make it happen, but it is totally possible. All right. Should I still apply if I don't have any research experience? I see lots of nods.
One thing to consider if you don't have research experience is like, there's kind of 2 issues with that, right? One is that the PhD program might have issues evaluating whether you can do research. Of course, you can get over that, but like a bigger issue that you should consider is like, what if you don't like research, right? So a PhD, like if you have some evidence that like a PhD program is right for you, you should still apply and you should, you know, present that evidence. But like Nadia said before, that sometimes people apply to a PhD because they've been in academia for a long time and it's like the natural thing to do. But in my experience, a PhD program is very different than prior academic experiences that I've had. So if I didn't have research experience, it's possible I could have done that and just realized I hated it or something. So that's a risk I see with that. But if you do have evidence that you'd like it, then of course.
I will say there are some ways that you can get research experience while you're, say, working in industry or something similar. So I do cryptography and security, and there is a whole world of non-academic research, both in the hacker community and also in industry in these areas. And there's in fact like a huge number of conferences where people are essentially doing research. It's not academic research, but it's still research in, you know, understanding the security of systems, investigating things. They give talks, they write white papers, and at least within security as an academic discipline, you know, different faculty members have different relationships to this world, but I certainly think very highly of some of the people who do this kind of work. And somebody who, you know, had did well in undergrad so that I know that they have the technical chops and, produced great work that they were giving talks about in the hacker community, I would think very highly of them. So like, even if you finished undergrad and have moved on in the world, there are still ways to sort of get research experience that may be non-traditional, but that may get like a foot in the door to interact with academia.
And I would add that building on what Nadia said about thinking of research broadly, if you were active in the video game club, if you have done kind of projects really in any area that show kind of initiative and taking on things that are kind of open-ended, all of that you should think of as research experience, whether or not it involves actually writing a paper. Because that's sort of the underlying, I don't know, character trait that we're looking for. Also, because, as we said, this is such a personal kind of admissions process that happens, we definitely, at least a lot of professors will sort of grade on a curve a little bit depending on where you went to school. So if you came from a small school where there were a lot fewer opportunities to do research, not having done research is not probably going to be held against you. So I wouldn't let that be a disqualifier. This has been said by lots of people in lots of places, but if you don't apply, then you're guaranteed not to get in. So let the students or let the schools kind of evaluate whether or not you should apply or go to a PhD or be admitted there, rather than disqualifying yourself by not applying. All right, lots of people asked this next one as well. Uh-oh, what did I do? Well, the question was, can you get a PhD part-time? And I'll try to get it to reappear up here. So does anyone have a thought about that?
It seems like it would take a really long time. I don't know if anyone else on the panel would say yes.
So I know of people who do this. There are a couple ways that this happens. It's rare. And I think the reason that we're all sort of struggling is because I don't think anybody at UCSD is doing this. And most schools in the United States don't really do this. The two cases where I have seen it happen is people who are in the military. I think, I don't know a lot of the details, but I know that there are some programs in which people are studying part-time while being full-time employed at the military. And so this will take more time, and it's a little bit weird, but it's essentially kind of like treating writing papers and doing research as a part-time job. If you are specifically like in the military, this is something that may come up, but I don't know a lot of details. The other case where I have seen this is in European PhDs, where the system in Europe is very different from the United States. So in Europe, and this would only come up if you wanted to go to Europe and do a PhD, or you're already in Europe. And so I should warn you that it's a completely different system, and almost everything that we're saying is not accurate for Europe. But it is the case that sometimes people do PhDs part-time in Europe. Their PhDs are funded by industry. And so they're working in industry while producing papers on, say, some specific topic that the company who is funding their PhD wants them to work on. And so there's a sort of formal collaboration between the university and the company. This does not happen in the United States. So it's much rarer. So if you are in the United States and you're thinking like, oh, I don't really want to quit my job, I want to do a PhD part-time, that's not really going to work. So I think outside of these two specific scenarios that I mentioned, I haven't seen it at all. And it would be a giant red flag if somebody applied to UCSD saying, I want to do a PhD part-time.
Yeah, even I don't know if somebody has done a part-time, but it's fairly common in computer science PhD programs for students to go in industrial internship and then end up doing an internship for like a longer period of time, 6 months, maybe a year or something. And it's like sort of taking a sabbatical from your PhD. The internship is in your research field, but right at that point of time, you're not in your lab or doing your actual like research on your thesis or your coursework or anything. So it's sort of part-time. Also, like Nadia mentioned, I know a person who is doing a PhD and he is employed by US Navy. And so he does like, he works in the Navy's research wing and also works as a PhD student for like half a day or something. So that's sort of part-time, but not like a, yeah, I don't know anyone who's actually hired as a in a PhD program as a part-time student in general.
I will say one more thing that I know that before I applied to grad school, there are some like national labs sometimes that do like fund your PhD part-time if you've been there for a while. So if you work for like Lincoln Labs, if you work there for like 5 or 6 years, sometimes they'll fund your PhD and they'll cover like your stipend, but you work for them like 1 day a week. So maybe that's kind of like a part-time thing. So I just know that exists too.
But it's all this is extremely rare. So I definitely don't count on it as your kind of first line plan. The next question is, what job opportunities in industry does a PhD or master's in CS open and close compared to a bachelor's?
I would like to start here. So if you have a master's in CS or a PhD, it doesn't really close any opportunities as you should like think it should open more. If unless like a job specifically wants only a bachelor student, which I don't think they'll in general want. But in if you have a master's that then you don't really gain a lot of academic experience before you apply again, because it's usually master's programs are like 16-month or 2 years programs, and students start applying right from their first semester or like before the first year ends, and so you don't gain a lot of experience before you start applying. So there is not a lot of difference for job opportunities in a master's or a bachelor's. There's certainly like you can tell them that I'm doing this course, like I'm like transitioning to this field, and so you can apply to a little more specialized job that helps for a master's students. For a PhD student or like a PhD graduate, it's a whole different thing, because now you have an expertise in a field, and so you can apply to those specialized jobs that no one else is qualified for in general. So and there are like startups in computer science all over the world, and they are looking for these people. Every company is looking for specializations, like people who have expertise in some field. So PhD opens a lot of like opportunity in industry, and computer science, like we as computer science people are fortunate enough to have tons of opportunities in industry after our PhD.
I could add a bit to that. I completely agree with what you just said. I think I just add that some jobs actually require PhDs. So if you want a job at, say, Microsoft Research, you really have to have a PhD for that. If you plan on running a company that works on government research grants, you need a PhD to be able to do that. If you want to run a PhD in like some large research lab at a company, if you want to run a research lab at some big company, you need a PhD for that. And then kind of adding to what Akshat just said, I had a friend who created a startup with 3 other PhDs. And I think part of the reason they got so much funding was because they had 3 PhDs. No one looked closely that the startup was in AI and they all had PhDs in architecture, but it actually did incredibly well as a startup. And so there's job openings that become available if you have a PhD. And I'd also add that just like Steve said, I had a lot of friends go to big companies like Google and Facebook, and they've done very well with their PhDs, and they have a very high ceiling in how high they can get promoted because of that PhD.
All right, next question. Is there a time of life that it is best to get a PhD? And is there an average age for a first-year PhD candidate? I'm sure there isn't. I don't know what it is. Go ahead.
I don't know the average age either. I think a lot of people do come straight out of undergraduate programs, and that certainly works. I worked before I came back for, several years. And I think the thing to keep in mind then is like, you're going to be taking a pay cut if you're going from a CS job to a CS PhD. So just like remember that you're going to have to, relearn how to save your pennies. And then I will say, actually, in my group, when I was a PhD student, we had another student who was in her 50s. So it's actually entirely possible to do a PhD sort of at any point in your life, especially, like if you come back and you say like, hey, I'm in my 50s and I want to get a PhD, again, I think this is often an indication about, yes, I'm taking this very seriously.
Does anyone else want to go ahead?
So I think one thing that's bringing up for PhDs is that in like prior levels of academia, so, in your undergraduate, like especially, a lot of things kind of like, a lot of times people separate their social circles kind of into, what year you are in the program. And then that's usually like highly correlated with age. So you'll get a bunch of people of the same age hanging out. And it's not really my experience in the PhD that much. Like you still like know the people in your cohort, but in general, you get separated into kind of like your research areas. And like, in my area, that means that you're like, right now in particular, that means people are in like their 20s to early 30s. But for the most part, like I don't know everybody's age in the program. The people whose ages I do know, it's just because they explicitly mentioned it. And people who I thought were a certain age, when they mentioned their age later, I guessed wrong. So it's like, in general, if you're in like your 20s to early 30s, like you won't stand out at all. That's what I would say.
The implication is that you will stand out if you are sort of beyond your mid 30s. There's the reality is that there's a lot of people who are kind of in their late 20s in grad school. And so if you are in your 50s and you have children and you're married, you will be in a very different stage of life from most of the other people in among your grad school colleagues.
Yeah, I would like to add something. So I started my PhD at 29, and I definitely felt a little bit like old because most of my peers were 22, 23 years old. But it also adds, like there's a lot of benefit to that. And because you have more experience and you're more clear as to what you want to do with you're more motivated to do a PhD as well. So there's no bad time to apply. Whenever you feel motivated enough to do a PhD, definitely apply at that time. Yeah.
All right. I think we have time for we have time for about one more question. How important is it to reach out to potential advisors before applying? Can they vouch for you in the application process later on? Professors get a lot of email from prospective graduate students. So much so that there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of, people include their resumes and it's just a lot. So, and what I do is I direct them all to a web form on my webpage, and that all gets dumped into a spreadsheet so that I can sort of look at them all at once. And I will go and look at all their applications in the pile when we do admissions. So maybe other professors can share what they do, but it doesn't hurt, but it's not the most effective thing. Writing down the professor's name in the who do you want to work with box is much more effective in terms of your time.
Unless you have a specific question that you're asking. So if you have a specific question that you're asking, like, are you still working in this area? Are you admitting students? That kind of thing. That's a reasonable reason to email a potential advisor, but we get a huge number of obvious copy-pasted emails. There are certain countries where people seem to be advised to just spam every professor on the planet looking for responses, and it's extremely annoying. So you do not need to email us. Just write a paragraph in your statement of purpose of why you want to work with particular faculty members, and we'll see that when you apply.
The other cases I see are successful is when your advisor, maybe you're doing undergraduate research and your advisor reaches out because they know me and says, hey, I've got a really strong student. They're interested in what PhDs would be like at UCSD. Do you want to talk to them about your lab? And then I'm most of the time very happy to talk with the student. But it's not initiated by the student, it's initiated by the advisor.
All right, so we are just about out of time, and I have a couple of more business slides before we wrap up. So as I said, this is so first of all, thank you panel for all those excellent answers. Those were great. And thank you attendees for all their awesome questions. So I said, this is an experiment. We're going to do this again, actually in early December. You're welcome to register again if you want to come and see it all again, but we want to make it better. So I'm going to send out this survey, and attendees, if you could fill it out, this would be enormously valuable to us. Future applicants or future prospective PhD students will thank you as we make these sessions better. So keep an eye out for that. That'll come out later today. The other thing is that the department, our department here is, if you registered for one of these, then we're going to waive your application fee to UCSD's PhD program. And so if you're applying to PhD programs, we would love you to apply to UCSD. I think we have an awesome program. We have great students, as you can see. And we'll waive the application fee for you. So keep an eye out for an email about how to take us up on this. I'm not exactly sure how it's going to work, but it'll probably involve an email and a code or something. But keep an eye out for that. And definitely, we would love to see your file. And that's it. So thank you, panel. Thank you, attendees.
One more thing. There was a question before about what to do if their questions aren't answered here. So maybe who should they?
Yeah, that's a good. Yeah. So there, like I said, you guys submitted about 600 questions, and there's a lot of overlap. I am trying to figure out what to do about that. I will definitely look through the list of questions that at least were asked on Slido and try to at least write short responses to some or most of those and maybe send those out in a big email. You know, it's very clear from the questions that we got that there's a lot of pretty common concerns. And so I'm brainstorming with some other faculty about how to produce a FAQ that, you know, provides hopefully a lot of different perspectives on the questions where there's a very, you know, like what grad student life is like. There's not a single answer for that. So finding a way to get a variety of answers and voices on that, I think would be really valuable. And, you know, I will probably send you an email about that when we get something up. You can also just check the homepage for this event, and that page will probably get updated with links to this information as we assemble it. So yeah, we will try to do our best to get you some answers to as many of your questions as we can. And that's it. Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming.
Thanks, Steve.